Hello friends, I am Divyang and welcome to my session. Hope you are doing good. Today's session is about OAuth and SAML basics and fundamentals. I want to show you some screenshots. Have you ever seen any such screens on your mobile or desktop? If you have seen any such screens, then you are using OAuth. Let me show you some timelines. SAML has been introduced in 2002 to provide single sign-on means SSO feature to corporate users. It was very first of its kind. After few years, in 2006, OAuth has been introduced to solve some of the challenges of non-corporate means individual users. Initially, both of these standards were very complex and not very well adopted by developers. Over the period of time, both standards have evolved and shared lot of things with each other. Right now, both of the standards are resolving challenges of different use case, but the underlying principle is same. So, the question is, what is OAuth or SAML? Let's say we have a user and resource. What could be the most basic way to access resource? User requests a resource with username and password. User's authorization will verify with DB and user allowed to access resource. Compare this flow with OAuth or SAML flow, then OAuth or SAML flow will look like this. So, in this session, I will explain what are the challenges with basic authorization technique and how OAuth or SAML is resolving them. Before beginning, let us see the agenda of our session. OAuth is an essential service for cloud infrastructure. Nowadays, many organizations are moving towards zero trust security, and OAuth is a best choice to achieve zero trust security. Other than zero trust security, mobile apps are widely adopting OAuth. You have already seen some familiar screenshot at the initial of this session. Many apps are providing feature to log in with Play Store account. You will also find few implementations that combines OAuth and SAML both. So let's begin our session. Let's first try to understand all the challenges and see why do we need OAuth or SAML. This is the manager at Knowledge Simplified Organization. Organization is offering few subscriptions to their employees. One employee joined organization recently. Now here we have three entities involved. The first is all subscription services. Second is employee. And the third is manager or organization. Let's understand their challenges one by one. Starting with entity 1. On organization's approval, service is providing credentials to employee. and establish a trust that employee is working in knowledge simplified organization. Let's say few more employees have got organization's approval and joined a service, providing credentials to them as well, and establish a trust. Service is maintaining users' credentials in DB and develop entire infrastructure to support login. Like if user forget credentials, then use SMS gateway or something like that to support recovery of account. So, here is our first challenge. Service has to develop and maintain login infrastructure and establish a trust that employee is working in knowledge simplified organization. Let's move to another challenge. We saw that user has created credentials for the subscription. Organization is providing few more subscriptions. User is creating credentials for them as well. Here is our second challenge. Employee has to remember credentials for all different subscriptions. Now, extending more to this challenge. User is not associated with any organization like non-corporate user. User want to use Udemy. For that, user has to create credentials in Udemy. User also want to use Gmail, so created credential in Gmail. Again, the challenge is same. User has to remember credentials for all different subscriptions. Now, here one interesting things happen. User like one course on Udemy and want to share with his friends. All friends are in Gmail. In this case, user has to log in with Gmail and share course details separately with them, or provide Gmail credentials to Udemy and Udemy access contact from Gmail. But that is very risky, as Udemy may start Google Drive or any other service of Google on behalf of user. This is the challenge for user. User cannot provide limited access of one service to other service. Let's move to another challenge. Let's say employee has decided to leave organization. Employee hold credentials for multiple subscriptions. Manager has to notify each service provider to cancel subscriptions of employee. New employee has joined organization. Manager has to work with service provider to allow subscriptions for new employee and establish a trust between employee and service provider. Here are the challenges for manager or organization. Manager has to notify each service provider to cancel subscription of employee and revoke trust between employee and service provider. After employee quit and before ID cancel, any use of service by employee has to pay by organization, because there is a trust between employee and service provider. So, here are all the challenges with basic authorization. If you have any question, then please feel free to comment me. Understanding challenges are very important here. Let's understand challenges again with different example. This is the owner. He has opened one restaurant. Restaurant need daily supplies. They are coming from different stores. Stores allow restaurant owner to pay bill on weekly basis. Restaurant owner has hired one employee to pick up all the supplies. Again we have three entities involved. The first is stores that are providing supplies. Second is employee who is collecting all supplies. Third is the owner of restaurant. Let's understand their challenges one by one. Starting with entity 1. As we know, stores are providing credit of 1 week. So, stores are giving supplies to trusted person only. And for that, once restaurant owner introduce his employee, stores are providing ID to employee and establish a trust that employee is working in known restaurant. Let's say few more employees from restaurant have joined service, providing ID to them as well and establish a trust. Stores is maintaining register to maintain person detail. So here is our first challenge. Store has to maintain register and establish a trust that employee working in known restaurant. Let us see another challenge. We saw that employee has ID of store. Restaurant owner has tie-up with multiple stores. All stores are providing ID to employee. Here is our second challenge. Employee has to carry all IDs with him. Let us see another challenge. Employee has decided to quit restaurant. Employee hold IDs from multiple stores. Restaurant owner has to notify each store to cancel ID of employee. Restaurant owner hires new employee. Restaurant owner has to introduce new employee to each store and prepare his IDs. Also, establish a trust between employee and a store. Here is our challenge of restaurant owner. Owner has to notify each stores to cancel ID of employee and revoke trust between employee and store. After employee quit and before ID get cancelled, any transaction done by employee has to pay by restaurant owner because there is a trust between employee and stores. If you have any question, then please feel free to comment me. Again, understanding challenges are very important here. How to solve these challenges? There can be a various solution. One solution is bank card. Bank card means any debit card or credit card. But in general, I am calling it bank card. Restaurant owner open an expense account of employee. Employee present a credentials and collect a bank card from bank. All stores are registered with bank and receive a machine. Let's see how this will resolve challenges one by one. First challenge is store has to maintain register. Employee is presenting bank card to store. Store is verifying card with bank. Let's say few more users came to store. present a card to store. Store verify them with bank. So, store does not require to maintain register anymore and does not require to establish any trust to provide credit. If user has valid card, then he can purchase a goods. Second challenge is employee has to carry all the IDs with him. Employee is presenting credentials to bank and get a card from bank. All stores are able to verify bank card. Employee does not require to hold ID of individual stores. Third challenge is restaurant owner has to notify each store to cancel ID of employee. Any delay can cause loss. In this case, owner simply close expense account of employee and revoke card of employee. When new employee join, owner open new expense account for him. New employee present a credentials and get a card from bank. So, this is the complete solution. If you are closely observing entire system, then you will find that other than money management, bank is doing identity management as well. And that is what we are looking for. If we are applying same solution to our original challenges, then it will be look like this. Let's see our first challenge. Service has to develop and maintain login infrastructure and establish a trust that employee is working in knowledge simplified organization or some particular organization. Let's see how our solution help here. User login to SAML server using credentials. Get the token from SAML server. Present token to service. Service verify token with SAML server, and that's it. If service has few more employees, they are also working in same way. Service does not require to maintain separate infra for login and does not require to establish a trust that employee is still working in particular organization. If employee has valid token, then he can access service. Means every time before accessing service, employee has to prove himself. Let us see our second challenge. Employee has to remember credentials for all different subscriptions. In previous problem, we have seen that how user log into SAML server and get the token to access service. Here, one thing to note. Bank cards are physical and user can hold it easily. That is why bank cards are exclusive per account, while SAML and OAuth tokens are digital and difficult to hold. Considering that SAML and OAuth allow user to generate and keep few amount of active tokens. Each token active for 1 to 8 hours depending on SAML or OAuth server settings. And to easily generate token, SAML and OAuth provide login screen before accessing any service. With this, user not required to hold separate credentials for separate services. Extending my answer to individual user who is not associated with any organization like non-corporate user. So, how do he take advantage of this solution? For those users, you can see the options like sign in with OpenID or Twitter or Facebook or such a social networking site. Each one of them has their own OAuth server deployed. An service provider has to register with individual OAuth service providers. Let's say user choose to sign in with Google. So, user redirect to Google site and ask for credentials. User enter credentials. Once user complete login, then Google is asking user to allow certain access for Udemy. User allow few access to Udemy and press OK. That will redirect back to Udemy. Now Udemy can have limited access of user's Google account. If you look behind the scene, then user open Udemy site and choose to sign in with Google. That will redirect user to Google login page. Once user complete login, then Google asks user to allow Udemy to access public profile and contacts. Once user allow access, then user redirect back to Udemy site with valid token. Udemy use this token to call Google API that give detail of user profile and user contacts, and Google Server Verified token before processing any API. Definitely you will understand more once you will finish end-to-end sequence. Coming back to our next challenge. Manager or organization has to notify each service provider to cancel subscription of employee. Any delay can cause loss of organization. So this one is fairly simple for manager. He just need to remove account from one place, and for new employee create an account at one place. Recall, restaurant owner has closed bank account of employee. No need of separate removal or separate creation of account for each service. And this is the answer of why do we need OAuth or SAML. In the coming slides, we will explore each entity and see how are they working. And then we will see end-to-end sequence. If you have any doubt, please feel free to comment me. So let's start. Let's first zoom into server. SAML has identity broker. This will provide login screen, generate token, maintain token, and validate token. Then comes identity provider. This can be Active Directory, LDAP server, or any such kind of system. If you take OAuth server, then it has authorization server. As I have mentioned initially that few implementations have combined OAuth and SAML together. From next slide, I will refer OAuth and SAML as identity server. Now zoom into services or service providers. First, focus on to backend of the service providers. Each service provider get their separate client ID and secret from identity server admin. When any API get called with token, then service will use client ID and secret to fetch token info from identity server. Comparing with our bank example, you can consider it as card verification machine. Now zoom into front end. The front end can be app or a browser base. Front end will call backend API with token. So how front end is getting token? Identity server is providing a login screen. Let's see how this is working. For now, consider only one app. Each app gets its separate client ID and secret from identity server admin. That can be same or different than backend depending on the use case. User is opening URL to access service. Initially token is missing, obviously. So URL redirect to identity server. This will present a login screen to user. User enter credentials and finish multi-factor authentication if there is any. Identity server will verify credentials and generate a token and redirect back to service URL with token. Now this token will be used to call backend service, and you know how backend is validating this token. Let us see some of the attribute of client. We know that front-end and back-end can have separate client ID depending on the use case. Let's see what are the attribute of client. The first attribute is client ID. This is mostly a string of ASCII character and not a UUID. Then comes secret. This is a password associated with client ID. Then comes scope. This is one of the important attribute of client. This will define scope of app or client. When token generated by this particular client, then token contains scope defined with this client. Let's take one example. We have Messenger backend that has users contact. Udemy want to access users contact. Messenger is expecting scope of Messenger contact and Messenger read to access contact. So, Udemy requests a valid scope for client ID. If admin revoke scope of particular client ID, then that client ID will not be able to access specific API even with valid user. So this is about a scope. Next attribute is redirection URL. This is also one of the important attribute. When identity server get user's credential and finish multi-factor authentication, then identity server will redirect here. This screen you might be familiar of. Let's understand this screen. Here Google is hosting OAuth server. This is a user who has created account in Google. This is a service provider called Pocket linked with Google's OAuth service. It has its own client ID and secret from Google. These are the scope of service provider Pocket. Once user allow, then Pocket can have access of email and basic info of user. Let me show you another similar screen. Now zoom into user. Here we will take example of corporate user or multi-tenancy use case. So, before creating any user, we have to create organization. Organization can be created by identity server admin. We can ask identity server admin and create an organization with name ABC. So, our organization is ready. IS admin can add user into this organization. But it is not good to go to IS admin each time. So, while creating organization, it will create one user along with it. User can have some role. This role is application or service specific. Let's consider first IS service. The first user is having one special role of full admin with respect to identity server. Means this user can create new user, delete or update any existing user in this org. Even this user can create another full admin user within this org. Let's say this user is creating another user. From identity server perspective, full admin can define some role for new user, like another full admin, read-only admin or a normal user. Now we have two users ready. And we have one service provider, messenger, linked with identity server. Can this user be able to use this service? The answer is no. This service requires user to entitle for the service, and messenger is expecting messenger entitlement. For any new entitlement, first it has to enable at organization level, and that can be done by identity server admin. Identity server admin has enabled messenger entitlement for organization. Now, full admin can enable entitlement for other users. And if admin wants entitlement for himself, then he can enable for himself as well. We got one more service provider, Udemy, linked with identity server. Udemy expect entitlement Udemy. We have requested and enable entitlement at organization level. And admin has enabled entitlement to require user. But still service is not enabled for user. Because Udemy expect that role either to be learner or instructor. If role is not specific to identity server, then we have to first enable it at organization level. So let's request and add role at organization level. Once organization starts supporting that role, then admin can assign that role to specific user, and service will be available to that user. You can pause the video and recall all the components again before we begin end-to-end sequence. So let's see end-to-end sequence flow. Let's take example of one user and one service provider. You can see parameter of user, service provider app and backend. Here frontend and backend both are using same client ID. You can note scope of the client. This scope I have took for example purpose only. Here Udemy video means video access of course, and Udemy lab means terminal access of course. So this client is approved to access video and lab terminal of course. Let us see token generation flow. User is opening site in his browser. As token is missing, this URL is redirecting to identity server with authorization header. You can note one interesting things here. Some identity server expect scope as well. You may have questioned that client already have approved list of scope, then why do client has to specify scope again? So we know that this client is allowed to access video and lab terminal both. However, let's say user has open course on mobile and due to small screen, lab terminal experience is not so good. In such situation, client can reduce its scope. So this scope is subset of whatever approved list of scope for this client. Let's come back to our sequence flow. After receiving this request, identity server present a login screen. Here, user enter credentials. On submission, identity server will generate a token. Token has various parameters. Few important parameters has been highlighted. Then generate a token ID mapped with token and redirect back to service provider's app. Now user is selecting one course and open URL of that course. Now let us see what happened at backend. Backend has received a request from user to access course. Service contact identity server to get token info. Identity server checked token ID and return a token to service. Service checked expiry of the token. Then check valid role. Then check valid entitlement. Then check valid scopes. Based on this information, service will approve the token and present the course to user with lab terminal. So, with this, we have covered end-to-end sequence as well. Here is a quick difference between OAuth and SAML sequence flow. And with this, we have reached out to end of our session. Here is the conclusion of entire session. There are few more advanced things in this topic like self-contained token or JWT, which itself is a full-scale session. Then refresh token. Regarding zero trust security, it has various use cases. However, we have covered most widely used use case. And with this, we have completed the session of OAuth and SAML basics and fundamentals. Thank you.